I have an idea of what this wine is. I'm not quite sure yet which region I'm in. Maybe I'm in Barolo, maybe I'm in Etna, maybe I'm in Tuscany, but I know that this wine is Italian. And that is Italianity.
Hello, and welcome to Book Club with the Italian Wine Podcast. I'm your host, Richard Hough, and I'm delighted that you're joining us as we get between the vines with some of the best wine writing out there. So sit back, pour yourself a glass, and enjoy the show with the Italian Wine Podcast.
This month, my guest is Jessica Dupuy. Jessica will be a familiar voice to many of you as the host of the Italian Wine Podcast coverage from Texom. Today, she's on the other end of the microphone to discuss her new book, Italianity, launched at Vinitaly just a few days ago. Hi, Jessica. How are you? And a massive congratulations on a truly wonderful book.
Richard, how are you? I'm great. I feel like I'm still recovering from Vinitaly. But thank you so much. It was such an exciting time to be able to release the book at Vinitaly. And I'm happy to be here.
Excellent, fantastic. And probably no better place to launch a book about Italian wine than at Vinitaly, the world's biggest wine festival. What kind of reception did you get?
You know, for me, it was very overwhelming in a very positive way. You work on a project for so long, but you feel like you're in a bit of a bubble when you do that, especially writing and kind of being at your computer in a very closed environment. So when you finally get to release it out to the world, it was just such a gratifying and encouraging feeling to see how much energy and excitement there was. So I'm beyond grateful that Vinitaly was the place, the platform to be able to do that. I'm still getting over it. It was amazing.
Yeah, fantastic. And I have to say, we encountered a similar kind of response to it. Andrea Lonardi, who you co-wrote the book with, was delivering the Vinitaly International Academy masterclasses after Vinitaly this year, and he was explaining a bit about the concept of Italianity, but also the book was on display. The students were really, really enthused by it.
I'm so excited to hear that. I know a bunch of them received the copies, so I'm super excited that we're spreading, as I've said here in Texas, spreading the gospel of Italian wine culture. It's great.
Fantastic. So let's start then with the $1,000,000 question, which I'm sure you've been asked many times now before, but what is Italianity?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. So one that begged having on the cover of the book kind of a subhead, which is, so if you see the book, it says Italianity, the culture of Italian wine. Yeah. And we felt that was important to put there because, I'm not a native Italian speaker, but those who are very familiar with the word Italianità. And it's a fascinating word that I kind of looked into when we started researching the book. And it's this idea or this state of Italianness, right? Like this identity of Italianness. And a lot of it is encompassed in this idea of art, fashion, heritage, history, legacy. There's so many words you can throw out. You throw in food, throw in wine. This state of being Italian. And I think a lot of us, especially in this day and age, are using the word identity almost too much to the point where we're forgetting what really is behind it. And Italianità really does kind of encompass the depth of that. Italianity is a word that Andrea coined, and anyone who knows Andrea Lonardi knows that he's a little bit more creative. The way that he approaches wine or pretty much anything is in a little bit of a different headspace. And Italianity is a word that he started using when I first met him. So I'm a journalist, an American-based journalist in Texas. And I had been interviewing him for a story I was working on about new Italian wine. Like, what are some new methods that are happening? And when I interviewed him, he started using that word quite a bit. This was maybe 3 years ago. And I didn't really think much of it, but I thought, okay, that's fine. Italianity, never heard of it, but it sounds interesting. About 6 months later, I was in Valpolicella for what Bertani Domains was hosting as Emerone Academy. And he was there and started using the word again. And I thought, what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
I asked him to kind of stop and break it down. And it was really interesting what he had to say. We talked about Italianità, and he said that for him, Italianity was that identity of Italianness, but specifically through the lens of wine. And as an American who has been a wine lover and who has been an Italian wine lover for a long time, but also as someone who has studied certifications. So, I'm a certified sommelier through the Court of Master Sommeliers. I have my WSET diploma. I've just started the path towards Master of Wine. In those programs, they're regularly testing you on your blind tasting ability. And it's very, very common, particularly in the US, to blind taste wines, particularly red wines. And you're trying to immediately break down what's in the glass and determine where you are in the world. And with Italian wine in particular, it's very easy to look at color, smell some very common and similar aromas, such as red fruits, Amaro character, Alpine and Mediterranean herbs. And you start to smell and you think, okay, I have an idea of what this wine is. I'm not quite sure yet which region I'm in. Maybe I'm in Barolo, maybe I'm in Etna, maybe I'm in Tuscany, but I know that this wine is Italian. And that is Italianity, because you don't experience that with wines from other parts of the world. Absolutely, you can identify Bordeaux pretty quickly, or Burgundy pretty quickly, or Napa pretty quickly. But you don't say, I'm not sure where I am yet, but I know this wine is French, or I know this wine is American. There's something unmistakable about Italian wine, and that does also have a through line into the white wines as well. That when you smell it and when you taste it, you know you're in Italy. This idea for me was really beautiful because, especially for a country that is such a regional country, you're divided by mountains and rivers and ocean. And for so long, your individual regions have defined you. And the fact that, you've only been a united country since 1861, what fascinates me is that these wines, despite their individual indigenous character, they also have this common through line that the rest of the world deeply recognizes. And so we wanted to create a book that communicates that. Andrea being the insider and myself being the outsider, and trying to bring that together in essay and story and cultural kind of recognition through this book.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you mentioned there at the end of that answer, cultural recognition. And I'm just 19 or 20 pages into the book, which I'm thoroughly enjoying. It's extremely well written, and it's a pleasure, a joy to read it. But I'm struck as much by the kind of the cultural aspect as much, or maybe more than, those unmissable technical characteristics that you describe. To what extent is Italianity about the culture of Italian wine just as much as those technical aspects?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, in many ways, we needed to ground the definition, right? So what is Italianity? And it's kind of multi-layered. It is what we first described. So kind of that technical aspect of, with red wines, you notice these elements of ruby red character, slightly transparent, notes of red fruit, particularly cherry, orange peel, and especially as the wines age, they get more Amaro character, the Mediterranean and Alpine herbs. These are things that are all very common. Of course, there are individual differences, but these are things that are the through line. However, as we started to define that technical aspect, we also realized that you have to define the regional aspect. These wines are made, they may have the common through line, but when you're in Piedmont, When you're in Barolo, Barbaresco, or even the other regions that are working with the grape Nebbiolo, so Gattinara, Roero, and even extending beyond Piedmont into Valtellina, all of these different areas work with the grape in a different way. But Piedmont in particular, just as an example, the culture itself has a certain way about it. They're influenced by everything from the Alps just north of them and the culture in the Alps to, the way in which generations past have made wines, whether that's using large botti and then swinging on the pendulum to using smaller barrique and then swinging back on the pendulum to using the botti again. These are things we wanted to capture. What the conversations have been over generations that have strengthened what each of these regions represent. And that required telling that story. So there's the technical aspect, but then there's also this layer of these things wouldn't be the case. What you're finding in the glass wouldn't be the case if it weren't for the people. Because ultimately that's what it is. We talk so much academically about terroir, the climate, the soils, the growing environment. That's very important. But at the end of the day, the people putting the wines into the glass are also extremely important. And we wanted to capture that.
Yeah, and as I mentioned already, I'm getting a good sense of some of the people that you spoke to during the course of your research. As you mentioned, you co-authored this book with Andrea Lonardi, and he may be familiar to a lot of our listeners, but I want to get a sense of what it was like working with him. I've already encountered a couple of anecdotes from the book that I just found really interesting.
Yeah.
And make the book more, it's almost like a personal memoir in some ways as well. I was really taken by his experience in New York, where he was basically selling wine, and his encounter with Maurizio Bertacchini, who basically convinced him that selling wine wasn't just about hitting the numbers or knowing the product, but about understanding the customers and sharing the Italian way of life. And then the other revelation that I found staggering really was that Andrea, as a young boy, had a stutter, and when you see him speak so eloquently and fluidly, venitally in his second language, it's quite remarkable to think that he had a stutter when he was younger. So tell me, what was it like working with Andrea?
Working with Andrea was my own introduction into Italian culture. We joke now, and we kind of joked at the beginning that he likes to call me very Anglo-Saxon in that I'm very organized and I like my bullet points, and I like things to be on time. And a lot of that's because I'm a journalist, and by definition, I work on deadlines, and I need to make those deadlines if I'm going to stay employed. So Andrea is much more fluid. I don't mean that in his work life. He's extremely effective in the things that he does, but the way he approaches things and the way that he moves is very differently than myself. So that was a welcome adjustment, I think, for both of us. We both set expectations for here's how I need things to be done, and he helped me understand that it's okay to let down a little bit and relax a little bit and enjoy a little bit. And so I would say that among all things at the end of this project, I think we both had an effect on each other. But at the same time, it became, and I'm glad you mentioned that a little bit of this is a story about him. That's kind of that third layer is in organizing this. I realized early on that this really needed to be somewhat of a memoir, because his career is not the typical career that, at least in the US, we seem to think of when it comes to Italian wine. We seem to imagine, this Italian winemaker, they've probably had this winery handed down to them for generations. And some of them are in castles, or some of them are in these villas that are just out there in the pastoral hillsides. And it's just what they've been destined to be. That story, I think, is a romanticized story that Americans and other people, like I'm American, so I'm speaking for myself, but people from the UK or Asia. These are things we tend to have in our mind, but that's not Andrea's story. That's not many of the stories that we see in Italy. Some, in his case in particular, finding out how much he loved his Italianness required him to leave and work in New York and see Italy from the eyes of people who have romanticized it. And it reminded him of what a strong and beautiful culture, very layered culture, is in Italy. So we decided to kind of make this like an Odyssean journey, if you will, because he was very young when he got started, and to sell Italian wine is very different than making Italian wine. But when he came back to Italy to work for GIV, he first was charged with going down to Sicily and planting something like 100 hectares. This is when he was 30 years old, or in his young 30s. And it was difficult because he had a team already in Sicily that needed him to do this. But when he came down for a few days to kind of say, here's how we're going to do it, and I want y'all to do this, and I want you to do that, he would leave to come home for the weekend, and everything he had implemented during the week, as soon as he came back the next week, it had been undone. And he had to realize really quickly that his team of Sicilian vineyard workers had their own way of doing things, and that you couldn't just come down from Verona and say, here's how we're going to do it, and expect them to do it that way. He had to learn that there are systems and there are cultures in place in which you need to understand and become a part of and adapt to in order to get the best out of the people that you're working with. So the story, or his memoir, is kind of also the realizations he's had over time, how he has learned to be led, and also how he has learned to be a leader. So there are many parts in it that are pretty vulnerable, if you will, in terms of him being honest about what he had to realize.
Yeah. He speaks, for example, about the importance of mentoring. That was another passage that I've dipped into, of both being a mentor and mentoring, both having that relationship with older, more experienced people in the industry, but then using your knowledge and expertise that you've gained as a way to help other people. And passages like that I thought were really effective and powerful as well, and kind of different to what you might normally expect to find in a book about wine.
Exactly. Well, and that's part of it. I mean, this is definitely not a business book, but it's definitely one where someone like my husband, who is a consultant in the tech industry, could read this book and say, there are some really applicable elements of input that I can take from this and place into the way I'm working within the different consultant clients I have. It's something for everyone. And the mentorship aspects were really important to Andrea. You'll see throughout the book that we have kind of mentors in each of the chapters and how he has learned from them. Everyone from Lorenzo Landi to Denis de Bourdieu to who was a Bordeaux professor, to Marco Simonite, who's kind of the guru of pruning, and also people like Stevie Kim, who it's not like she's a formal mentor to Andrea, but he has learned so much from her strength in going and being in many ways more Italian than a lot of Italians. So for him, this was a way to show gratitude to the people that he's been able to learn from over the years.
Absolutely. You mentioned that you traveled nearly 10,000 kilometers across Italy in preparing this book. So tell us a bit about that experience. What did you find? You spoke to some of the most remarkable and influential figures in the world of Italian wine. Can you give us maybe some highlights? Or
Absolutely. I have to say the direction of this book at first was going to be a little bit more academic. We were going to take more of the approach of like, okay, here's some stories, but to cement you in Chianti Classico, let's also tell you about the soils and the climate. And one day we had an interview with the Vaira family, in particular, Giuseppe and Francesca Vaira in Piemonte at their winery, and also by extension later met the parents, Aldo and Milena, and their brother, Isidoro. And in talking to them, the conversation really changed from being technical to being much more philosophical and much more story driven. And it was at that moment, early in the process of writing the book, that we realized there were many books, many great books on the technical aspects of Italian wine, but not enough great books on the story. And so I have to really hand it to the Vairas for helping us realize that. And they weren't trying to, or they didn't realize they were doing it. But in spending that time with them, we realized that there was so much more depth that we could give to people by taking this approach. I would also say that I was very humbled to be able to have time with Marchese Piero Antinori. I was given an opportunity to interview him, and I was humbled by that because of the great history that his family does have in making Italian wine. I mean, over 27 generations, which is just monumental. It's hard to wrap my brain around. But more than that, sitting in front of him is a man who is eminently polished and gentlemanly, but also eminently humble. And I just was really struck by the weight of that. But also struck by one thing. We interviewed him. We interviewed Angelo Gaia, who also had a similar appeal to him. We interviewed Vittorio Moretti of Terro Moretti, Bella Vista, Salon Mosco, Petra. And each time I interviewed these individuals, I always asked the question, well, is there anyone who has influenced you? Who has been someone that has given you perspective on how you've wanted to build your family business and bring it into the global market? And every single time, without even knowing that the other person had said it, each of them pointed to Robert Mondavi.
Yeah.
And Robert Mondavi, as an American, obviously has had such an impact on wine. But I think as Americans, we sort of take for granted just how deep that impact was. And it was so remarkable to me to hear people from Italy pointing to an American that they all felt gave them license to push beyond Italian borders and really get these wines into the hands of other people. So whether that be the US or the UK, et cetera, this is a man who really inspired them to do more. And I felt that it was just, that was the biggest surprise to me. And it was a beautiful surprise. So much so that we ended up including an essay about Robert Mondavi in the book because it was such a grounding character.
And was his influence mainly then in providing that commercial inspiration, or was that also in terms of winemaking or?
Yeah. I mean, something that Andrea points out many times in the book, and it's kind of a common thread, is that he really feels, and it kind of has made a manifesto about the fact that for many decades, different regions in Italy have achieved status or achieved icon, establishment. But much of that has been through the goal of copying or emulating some of the things that have already been done in France. And that there's this, we're always trying to strive for the Bordeaux model or the Burgundy model or even the Champagne model. And for him, he really, truly, truly believes that Italian wine, regardless of region, doesn't need to try to emulate any model, but that it should be proudly Italian. And at the same time, someone like Robert Mondavi was the person that was saying, yes, that, be Italian, but don't just stay in Italy. Push beyond, show people who you are, show people what beautiful wines you make, but not just the wines, the culture. And I mean, again, speaking only as an American, because I don't live in other countries, but pizza or pasta is on the table in American homes at least once a week.
Yeah.
Beef bourguignon is not. Mm-hmm. Okay. We're not in, like, that should tell you something, that we love Italian culture. And so to me, a lot of what we're trying to discuss in this book is for Italy and Italian wine to move into this next chapter and with the next generation, that it should be done with a great boldness and a great pride. And someone like Robert Mondavi was kind of that first person that encouraged people like the Gaia family, the Antinori family, et cetera, to take that by the reins and really go with it, really run with it.
Yeah. Okay. There are two other aspects of this book that I want to discuss with you. One is the fact that it's bilingual. We haven't mentioned that yet, but the book alternates between English and then with the translation in Italian on the opposite page, which is fantastically well done. I'm reading it in English, but I'm skipping across also to the Italian translation. As a translator myself, I'm curious to see how you did that, and I have to say it works superbly well, and in both languages it's extremely elegantly written, and not just a kind of bog standard translation either, but actually obviously translated by someone who can write equally well in both languages. The other thing I wanted to ask you about is the recipes. The book also includes a few recipes. So where did the inspiration for those recipes come from? How did you choose which recipes to include?
Yeah, that was, so this could have easily had a lot more recipes. And to be fair, like, I come from a background of cookbook writing. So I'm used to collaborative writing with chefs. And in this case, I was collaborative writing with a winemaker and viticulturist. But I mean, as I mentioned before about pizza or pasta being on the table in America, you can't talk about Italian wine and not talk about Italian food. Yeah. We knew we could not make this a cookbook as well. It would be 1,000 pages at that point. But there were some specific places where we felt it would be appropriate to include a recipe. So as an example, I loved getting to know the Minetti family and Chianti Classico, not just because of their reputation for making wine or also their reputation for making terracotta, but the fact that they have a herd of Chianina beef, and that Chianina and that particular breed is known for being what is used for bistecca fiorentina. And all of the books I've written on food in the past have been about that connection, the why or the how, not just here's a recipe. So it became real easy to figure out a way to spotlight something about the food, but that also had a connection to the people. Another example is when Andrea and the other quote unquote three musketeers for the Masters of Wine, Gabriele Gorelli and Pietro Russo, anytime they were studying for the MW, they would always go right after Christmas and spend a week down in Marsala because it was quiet and they could kind of hole up for a week and just study really, really hard. Right. And they would always do it at La Lumiere or La Lumi. I'm so sorry, my pronunciation is not correct, but a beautiful restaurant that is owned by Pietro Russo's cousin, Emanuele. And they would work all day in the restaurant, study. And then at night, Emanuele, would create these beautiful dinners for them. And it was a kind of a refuge, but also like a salve, like a way to nourish them. And so by telling that story, it felt appropriate to include one of his recipes. So things like that. So there's maybe about 9 or 10 recipes in the book overall, but it was really meant to just be a nod to, again, the culture and the people. Um, and with the Italian translation, I appreciate you mentioning it. We really felt that if this is a book that's going to be read by non-Italians, that we wanted to invite them deeper into Italianity. So if we're saying you need to know more than what's in the glass in terms of the people and how it's made, we felt that having Italian language literally right next to the English language is a way to say, hey, just glance to the right, glance to the other side of the page and see how this would be shared in their native language. I was inspired by the Masnaghetti book or all of his books, because those are also in both English and Italian, and I think they're beautiful. It was important to make this not only for non-Italians, but also for Italians. After all, it's a love letter for Italian wine. But I did have a lot of anxiety over it, because just as you read, I read Count of Monte Cristo in English growing up. Surely in the original French, it would be more beautiful, right? But the hope is that for those that read it in Italian, that they understand this was originally imagined in English and then offered as a gift in Italian, just because we felt that was really important.
Yeah, I think it comes across really well, but I can only imagine the logistical headache that gave you trying to perfect, apart from anything else, the layout and the word count, and just how deep you go into that translation, whether you make it a literal translation or whether you try to embrace a little bit of the native language. But I think you've done an extremely good job.
Thank you. We've had a couple of great people with their eyes on it, and it really helped to have multiple passes with multiple different people. So
there were a couple of other passages. Yeah. One other thing that I wanted to say about the book, it would have been easy for a book that, it seems like a coffee table book. This is going to look great on your coffee table, but it does have real warmth and like an intellectual depth. But it would have been easy, I think, as well, for it to have become this misty-eyed and sentimental fairy tale about everything that is beautiful and perfect about Italy and its wine. But it doesn't gloss over some of the challenges that Italy is currently facing. I was struck by that encounter you had in Barolo, where you were observing the impact of deforestation.
Yep.
And then also, issues like climate change obviously are a constant source of not anxiety, but source of innovation, maybe a source of concern in some cases. So what's your take on that?
We address a lot of things. So this is meant to make people excited and rejuvenate love and passion for Italian wine, but at the same time, it's meant to be provocative. There are some questions that we ask, and I'll use as an example the discussion of Friuli. One, especially like from an American standpoint, we are very much curious and in awe of a lot of the great wines coming out of Friuli, and we owe it to people like Master Sommelier Bobby Stuckey and Carlin Kerr from Frasca in Colorado, who have really spotlighted things about Friuli. And I'm not going to pick on Friuli only, but this is just an example. But we have a problem in that you have producers making 30 selections of different wines, and it makes things confusing to the consumer and makes things confusing in terms of what exactly the identity is of Friuli in terms of wine. And so when you have some producers that are willing to say, let's just stake our claim on X, Y, and Z, and I don't want to tell you what that should be, but let's really focus, and let's really show what is so amazing about this growing region by kind of drilling down a little bit. We compare it in the book to what's happened in New Zealand with Sauvignon Blanc. And basically are saying, don't go that far, right? You don't, because unfortunately in New Zealand, it's created a whole feeling of sameness among Sauvignon Blancs. And so they've had to work really hard to show the variation and diversity of how Sauvignon Blanc can be in the different regions of New Zealand. But it is an example of how they have figured out a way to communicate to the rest of the world what they're known for. And they're, this island country so far away from so many people. These are the types of things we address, which is what would happen if Friuli did this? Or what would happen if the Tuscan coast was more than just trying to emulate Bordeaux? Because now, after so many decades of growing these varieties, the Tuscan coast really has taken on this epigenetic character of these Bordeaux varieties that are much more Tuscan than they are Bordelais. So we wanted to really encourage and provoke people to be thinking about taking Italian wine into the next generation by, again, leaning into the identity, by becoming focused and becoming more provocative with the way they make their wines.
Okay, interesting. Final question on the book before we hear a little bit maybe about what you're doing at the moment, the Texas wine scene maybe, and life in America in general. Now things are... It's difficult to say if things are getting better or getting worse. I don't know. Let's get your take on that.
Yeah.
But tell me, how has the book changed you or your approach to life, and what have you embraced this Italian concept of Sprezzatura?
Yeah, so there is an essay, like kind of my final essay in the book, and we should mention that the book is really broken up into mainly probably 60% essays written from Andrea's perspective, and then the other 40% from mine, just to kind of give balance. And I do write...
Just to interrupt you, but there are also a number of essays from respected wine writers, wine figures around the world.
Yeah, that last chapter, we reached out to people who were either non-Italian or who are maybe Italian but have been living away from Italy for a while. And we wanted each of them to answer the same phrase, which is what Italianity means to me. So we invited people like Jeff Porter, Michaela Morris, Federica Mocha, who's a top sommelier at 67 Pall Mall in London, Rocco Lombardo, who's the president of Wilson Daniels Importing Company in the US. So kind of a range of people to respond to that. Shelley Lindgren, who's a restaurateur in San Francisco, and how Italianity has impacted their life. And so that was really fun to do and to bring in some other voices. We also, for me, I guess, I don't know. I feel like in a lot of ways I have been adopted by and welcomed by the Italian culture in so many of the different regions. And I feel both humbled and grateful for that. For the kind of personality that I am, it also makes me want more. So I feel like the past 2 years have been kind of an initiation into Italian wine culture, but I hope it's not over. I'd love to find more ways to continue that. So that is yet to be determined, but we'll see. At the same time, it also gave me such a great and profound appreciation for Texas, for being Texan, and for understanding that when you start to uncover the multiple layers that make a place so deep and complex, that it makes you appreciate where you also come from. And so, yes, in a lot of ways, it's made me curious to kind of unpack more about maybe writing more about Texas in the future. But it also makes me want to hold on to what I've been able to grasp so far. So a little bit of both.
So what about the situation in the United States at the moment? When we spoke last year, and if you want to find out more about Jessica's background as a food and wine writer, then I would direct you back to episode 2380 of the Italian Wine Podcast, which we recorded this time last year. But what's happened since then, if it's possible, to summarise a year in Trump's America? This time last year, there was this real threat of 200% tariffs hanging over the European wine industry. some of that uncertainty lingers on. But
Right.
how would you characterize the state of the American wine market in America at this point?
Well, a lot has happened in a year. And we were looking at such high tariffs last year, and there was that concern. What's been amazing is the resiliency of how importers and producers both have come up with a new playbook, figuring out how they're going to adjust this, into this, new way of life. But at the same time, they've remained resilient. So I would say that, sure, we're still dealing with a decline in wine sales, but that's not a problem of tariffs and imports. That's a whole other problem. Like that, that would take a whole other episode to get into. But what I recently actually have just written a story for 750 Daily, in which I've interviewed different importers on how they've adjusted within this past year and how they're trying to maintain a strategy moving forward. And so, this is a very American thing. We always find a way. We're not quitters. We don't give up. And so I think you found a lot of people who have figured out ways to, yes, there have been costs passed on to the consumer, but at the same time, there have been different approaches to having more salespeople on the ground, more people kind of pushing towards education and bringing people into the culture of wine to get people to be excited about wine. And then, like literally today, I was listening to the news about how, thankfully, our court system, our Supreme Court, ruled that it was illegal to impose 200% tariffs on countries, and that there are still some checks and balances here. And so, yes, there still are some double-digit tariffs that are in place. They will have to be rolled back after 150 days, according to the law. But what's also interesting is, literally, as of right now, the government has had to set up a refund system so that importers of all kinds, not just wine, but all over the industrial map, so that they can receive a refund for the tariffs that they were wrongfully charged. That is a massive bureaucratic headache that our government did not foresee, and I think it's the right thing to do. And it goes to show you that, when you don't think about the repercussions of things like this, it can turn into a little bit of a headache later on. And I think it's the right thing. So we'll see. I look forward to maybe you asking that question a year from now, because I do think it's going to be a difficult process to get these refunds in place.
Yeah, for sure. But I guess from looking at it from an external perspective, it is very reassuring to see that at least some of these checks and balances, like the US Supreme Court, are finally seeming to grind into gear.
It's a small step in the right direction, but we have a long way to go.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And like you say, that's probably a topic that we could discuss at some length, not least some of the other headwinds that are affecting the market for wine in general, not just Italian wine. But what are your plans then? I mean, I guess you're busy promoting this book. So how's that going? What are your plans for promotion? And then beyond that, what's next for you, Jessica?
Yeah, so we are promoting the book. It officially launches in the US in terms of, deliveries, et cetera, of pre-orders on April 28th. And so we're encouraging people who would like a copy of the book to order it from our website, which is just Italianity.wine, or you can just type in jessicadupuy.com and you'll find it as well. We can send signed copies that way, and it's just a way to communicate with people who want a copy of the book. And then we are doing a little more promotion. Andrea is going to be coming to the U.S. in May, and we'll be in Texas, San Francisco, and New York doing some events. And then it'll be kind of throughout the year. You'll see a lot of things pop up. We wanted to kind of keep communicating about Italianity for a while. Let's see. In the month of June, usually every year, my family, we take a few weeks to live in a different culture. So the past 2 years have been Italy for obvious reasons. In researching the book, we were in Lake Garda one year and Alto Adige another.
Now you're sick of Italy, so you're going somewhere.
No, it's funny. I'm kind of a little sad. We do need to give our kids a different experience. So we are going to be in the French Alps this year, but technically it's only I've already mapped it. It's only a couple of hours from Piemonte. So I'm sure I'll be dipping back down into Italy this summer.
What the best thing about the French Alps is, and that's the road to Italy. So you're not too far away.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm slowly moving in a different direction, but I think it'll take a while for me to shake Italy for sure.
Yeah. Okay. That all sounds fantastic. And we'll share some of those links to the website on the show notes. What about following you personally? You're active on social media?
Oh, yes. So you can follow my name. The only thing is it's Jessica N as in Norman, which is my maiden name, and then Dupuy. So Jessica N Dupuy is my handle on Instagram. And like I mentioned, Italianity.wine. I also have a Substack where we're going to be including new essays from Italianity, because if you know Andrea and you know myself, we're always coming up with new ideas, and the book at some point had to be closed, but we would like to use the Substack as an opportunity to continue writing about Italianity. So you can find that on jessicadupuy.substack.com, and it's called Direct to Press, which is obviously a play on winemaking and journalism at the same time.
Excellent. And I think that's a great way just to keep the conversation ticking over. Yes.
There's more to say, and we look forward to doing it there.
Excellent. And I'm hoping to get Andrea on the show as well to give us his perspective on what it was like working with this Texas. So
I'd love to know also. Please do it.
I'm looking forward to having him on the show as well at some point over the summer.
That would be great. Yeah.
Okay, Jessica, thank you very much. It's been extremely interesting. And as I say, I really love the book. So I would encourage all our listeners to get a copy of that. It's an extremely beautifully produced and well-written book. So thanks very much for being my guest today on the Italian Wine Podcast.
I am beyond grateful, Richard. It's always great to talk to you. Always great to use the Italian Wine Podcast as a fantastic platform. And I hope to be back soon.
Fantastic. Ciao.
Ciao.
Thanks for joining us on Book Club with the Italian Wine Podcast. Tune in again next month when we'll get between the vines with another great wine book. Remember, our show notes, including full details of all the books we've discussed today, are available at italianwinepodcast.com or wherever you get them.